going to suspend the regular business because we have a special point on the agenda today that we want to give ample time for the discussion. Just let me say before I introduce the guests and the point, we have a lot of guests here today, but we have a couple of special guests that I want to recognize. I think everybody will agree once I recognize them. First of all, Ed Sedlowski, who has been the leadership of our chapter for many, many years, is here from Florida, and we want to welcome him. And we have the president of another SOAR chapter, very active SOAR chapter, who's also trying to get some ideas from us, and we're trying to learn from him. Ray Bedalia from...
Hey, right.
It's 3111, right?
3111, yeah.
31, chapter 3111. It's okay. All right, so the Petcoke issue. We are very pleased to have two guests to open up on this from the Attorney General Lisa Madigan's office. Even McGinley, right here. And Norman Gonzalez. Thank you both. And we also are, of course, pleased as always to have the Alderman with us, John Pope. Thank you. So I don't know how you guys wanted to open up, but
well, good morning, everybody. First of all, let me say on behalf of our boss, the Attorney General Lisa Madigan, thank you very much for this opportunity for us to present this information. We're always looking for ways to get information out about what our office does. A lot of people don't know, and so this gives us a wonderful opportunity, although it's a very focused type session here. One of the things that, there are three things that our office does, and I'm not going to take up a lot of time, but one of the things we do is we're supposed to advocate on your behalf, okay? We're also supposed to legislate the means we'll draft laws that we feel are necessary and take the call, and I'll be sure to get our numbers out to you, and I did sign the sheet, so you all will definitely have our contact information. But I'm going to turn it over to Evan. He's the attorney. He'll tell you everything that's going on with the cases and where we stand at this point.
Thanks. Hi, as Skip said, my name's Evan McNally. I work in the Environmental Bureau in Lisa Madigan's office here in Chicago. Just by way of a little background about what the Environmental Bureau does, there's several bureaus within the Attorney General's office. Each bureau has different sort of responsibilities and jurisdiction. Specific types of issues. With the Environmental Bureau, we're basically responsible for dealing with violations of state environmental laws, some federal environmental laws as well. With the Petcoke situation, oh sure, yeah, I'm sorry, I'll try and talk out to having you vote. Make sure I get everyone else in here. So what we do is we take cases that are referred to us typically by Illinois EPA, which is the state environmental agency that oversees all the environmental laws in the state. They're also responsible for permitting facilities. So when you have a facility like, let's say, KCBX or Beamster Board, just to give a couple of relevant examples, they have to have permits that are issued by the state in order to allow them to do certain types of activities. Some of the permits that they have to have deal with things like being able to emit, to operate a business that's going to actually emit particulate matter, such as is the case with Petcoke or with coal. There's also permitting that's required in some instances because they're industrial facilities. There's something that's called stormwater. Stormwater takes place when you have rainfall coming down onto the ground, and if you have an industrial facility like KCBX, you've got Petcoke, you've got coal, rainwater comes down and sort of washes that dust and material off of the site, and then it'll go into the Calumet River, it'll go into storm sewers outside of the facility, and that creates other types of environmental violations. So, generally speaking, what ends up happening is when Illinois EPA determines that there is a violation of an environmental law or multiple environmental laws, they refer the case up to our office if they are unable to come to some kind of resolution with the facility. In the case of the KCBX and the Beamster-Moore facilities, that's what took place. Illinois EPA determined that there were violations of state laws, and those matters became referred up to our office. Now, in this instance, because of these facilities, things are slightly different because with the Beamster-Moore facility, the city of Chicago is also involved. And so, if you look at the complaint that we filed on behalf of the people of the state with Beamster-Moore, we did that in conjunction with the city of Chicago and with their law department. The city, and I'm sure the alderman can, perhaps tell you a little bit more about some of the laws, but basically speaking, the city has developed its own laws, and they go towards licensing, operating businesses, or conducting activities that cause nuisance, things of that nature. And so what we have now at this point are 3 lawsuits that our office has filed. The Beamster-Moore lawsuit in conjunction with the city of Chicago, the 2 lawsuits that our office has brought against the 2 KCBX facilities, the one on 107th and South Burley, the larger of the 2, and then the one that's up on 100th Street. And that one, as you may know, the 100th Street facility is shifting most of its activities down to 107th Street. Where we stand at this point with respect to the litigation is that all 3 cases were filed back in the fall of last year. We have gone through, just for education and background purposes, once we file a lawsuit, what has to take place next is that the defendant has to what's called answer the complaint. We set out a number of allegations pertaining to the violations that we say that facility has actually caused. They have to answer that and say, yes, we admit to this fact, this allegation, we deny that, we don't have enough information to be able to say. After the answering phase is completed, the next phase that takes place, typically in the litigation process, is discovery. So that means that both parties in the lawsuit are exchanging information about what they know about the violations that have taken place or alleged to have taken place. And then you're going through that process of gathering more information. Ultimately, you're going towards, in the old days, you go towards trial. But nowadays, most cases aren't tried to completion. Instead, you have motions, and you end up making arguments before a judge in what's called summary judgment, and it's an alternative to actually trying a case. The other way a case can get resolved of is through settlement, and settlement is also a possibility. At this point, though, we're proceeding with the litigation, and we'll see where that takes place. The litigation process, for those of you who may not know, can take a fairly long period of time because particularly for large entities such as a KCBX or Beamster-Moore, they're big companies, there's lots of complicated factual questions that come into play, and so the discovery process can take a lot of time. So it's not uncommon for a case to take 2-3 years, even longer, to go from the time that the case is filed to when it's finally resolved if you're going through the litigation process. Typically, if we settle cases, that process takes, that the resolution happens sooner. But that's, it can take a fairly long period of time, and I know for people who are interested in cases like this that are out in the community, sometimes you're wondering, like, what's going on, what's happening to it? But we are always diligently trying to move these cases forward, particularly where, as here, you have a lot of health and health issues, health impacts within the community, and you have a lot of children in the neighborhood, and we consider children to be a sensitive population. Children are still growing, their bodies are still developing. The impacts that are alleged to have taken place by Beamster-Moore and KCBX potentially pose greater harm to children, also to the elderly as well. So, we're moving forward on all fronts in terms of litigation. The other aspect of this that I should tell you about is KCBX South, this facility at 107th South Burley, attempted to get a permit to add to their operations. And the permitting process requires a facility like KCBX to submit an application to Illinois EPA. Illinois EPA then reviews the permit application and decides whether the facility demonstrates that they can operate their facility within the requirements of the law. In this case, Illinois EPA made the determination that KCBX could not do that, and so what ended up happening was that they denied the permit. KCBX appealed that decision to a state board called the Pollution Control Board, and the board just sent that, found that the agency's denial of the permit was not entirely proper, and asked the Illinois EPA to go back and sort of take another look at it, and that currently is under review by Illinois EPA. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody may have, but I won't take up more time from you.
No, we thank you very much, and we want people to ask questions and we want discussion. So, and we also want to give Alderman Pope a chance to speak.
I just had a question. You had mentioned the Beamster board site. Can you give an update there? I know there was piles of various material on the site. That seems to be gone at this point, and I know the disposition has changed. So,
sure. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. So when we filed suit, one of the ways that we deal with lawsuits when they come into our office, oftentimes we will meet with the defendants before we file suit and say, we'd like to try and work out a resolution. Okay. Are you amenable to doing that? These would be the conditions for settling the case. In a case like the Beamster Ward case, though, because of the immediacy of the harm that was being caused by the facility, what we did was we worked out what's called an agreed interim order. So it's kind of like a partial settlement of some of the issues that are in the case. And in this particular situation, what we did with Beamster Ward was we worked out a settlement that required them to remove material from the site. So the petcoke had to be removed, the coal had to be removed, and some of the other materials that they had on site also had to be removed. They then also had to undertake, as you may notice, if you're going down 106th Street over the bridge, if you're going west over the bridge, you see there's a big tarped area right alongside the river and onto 106th Street. That is, as best we understand it, when Beamster Ward bought the facility back in the mid-'80s, that was steel. It's called iron-rich material, but it's basically a byproduct of the steel. It's probably slag. Thank you. Well, we haven't made that determination hasn't been made officially yet, and there is sampling work that's taking place on that pile of material. And the hope is by ascertaining what that material actually is, confirming if it's slag, or whatever it happens to be, then there will be discussions about what steps need to take place next. Currently, though, the material, unlike the petcoke and the coal, that material is relatively immobile. It's not blowing away from what we understand. And last summer, if you looked at the material before it was all tarped over, it was actually growing, weeds and plants and things like that on top of it, which tends to keep whatever material is there in place. But now it's all tarped over, so it's not going anywhere. And once we determine, or Illinois EPA makes the determination what's actually that material consists of, then there will be other discussions about what next steps have to take place.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
I have one more question, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I know the cases are in litigation, but the ultimate goal is what? To have the companies comply, to fine them, to shut them down, to do what? Because you're looking at a number of charges, I would assume, as part of those cases. and the case was brought about because there was miscellaneous, I guess, multiple violations, they weren't in compliance. So what is the ultimate end game here, and any prediction in terms of time? And I know everyone knows litigation takes a long time, so I'm not trying to back into a corner, but again, the ultimate goal here, and any idea in terms of timing?
Well, I mean, the ultimate goal is, right now, you know, there's moves that are taking place in the city in terms of developing ordinances that would regulate the Beamster Board, the KCBX facilities. There's also efforts that are taking place at the state level as well, both in Springfield and before the Pollution Control Board. The Pollution Control Board serves a couple of functions. One is that if someone has a dispute about a permitting decision, you can appeal that to the Pollution Control Board. But the Pollution Control Board also adopts regulations that govern environmental matters that are in place statewide. In addition to that, though, there's also legislative efforts that are taking place in Springfield. So it's both the legislative and the regulatory process are contentious, and I'm speaking about this only based on information that I've heard from other people. I am a litigator. I'm involved in the litigation process, so the best I can do is give you secondhand information. But both the legislative and the regulatory process about regulating Petcoke is very contentious because up to this point, these have been considered to be legitimate businesses, and now there's an understanding that the businesses have certain health and environmental impacts. The question is, how do you balance that? And to get to the Alderman's question about what's the end game, the end game is to get these facilities into full compliance with the requirements of the Environmental Protection Act, which is the law that the Illinois EPA enforces and our office enforces as well, and also to get them into compliance with other regulations. Now, in some instances, Beamster Board, while they were operating, and currently the facility is vacant, they basically removed everything from the facility. They're apparently in the process of trying to sell the property. The end game would be to get them, if they wanted to continue to be in business, they would need to step up and have more permits currently than they have. And they would be required to basically take steps that would bring them up to what the level of the law requires. Similarly with KCBX, that, I mean, generally speaking, to put a facility out of business is that happens only in very rare instances for extreme violations of the law. And you know, when you're asking a judge to shut down a business, judges take that extremely seriously, and the showing that has to be made in order to do that is very high. I mean, you really have to bring in and muster a lot of evidence showing that that business poses like a grave, deadly threat from continued operation before it's likely that you will be able to get a judge to shut a business down. So really, I mean, at this point, what we're trying to do is get them to operate in full compliance and to really take very seriously the need to regulate the emissions that are coming off of the facilities, because Petcoke is known for creating particulate matter. That particulate matter gets windblown, it gets into the neighborhood, and in our office, as well as at Illinois EPA, we've heard at this point a number of stories about how people's lives are being impacted by this, and you know, we're trying to make sure that out of the litigation process, you would regulate these facilities so that they are not emitting Petcoke or dust, or at least it's being, you know, it's down to the lowest possible degree.
Yeah. I used to drive payloader in the mill, and even when we covered the coal, it still blew all over the place. It goes, seeps, the water would flow around. We had sewers going trucks. It'd be half of the bucket would be gone. It'd be flying around. That's why we're called the Windy City. Am I right or wrong? But the thing is, what I'm looking for is, what are we getting? We're waiting for all this stuff to happen. You know, we don't want them to close down because probably some of us work there. But what I'm looking at is there anything we can gain out of losing? Like maybe tax deduction or something? Hello there, that's where you come in.
We do it every year.
You understand what I'm talking about, though? Trying to get an idea.
Yeah, I mean,
Have you ever been on the piles? Have you drove on the payload or a truck and just seen on a windy day to see all that stuff blowing all over the place?
I mean, I have not been on the facility. I mean, I've
Try it
seen.
sometimes. You'll see what I'm talking about. I did it for 25 years, so I'm just looking for some kind of, you know, like we can try.
Well, I mean, just, you know, our office basically enforces the laws, but what you're talking about, it sounds like is a question of, you know, the law, we can only do what the law allows us, our office, to do. And to the extent that there are other issues that you're thinking about what the impact is when you get tax breaks.
And then they claim it's going to be safe. What is safe when it's fresh drinking water for millions of people and it's the air for millions of people here? So that's my question. We want a safe environment, and so I just thought about, you know, EPA, come on, do your job and get it done.
Before we take any more questions, John, do you have anything?
You want me to speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll try to shed some more light on this. As you can see, it's a very complex issue, and I think it really came to light back in August when there was a high wind in the area, and it was captured on video. Some of the material coming off of the 107th and Burley site. That really garnered a lot of interest, and steps were taken to address that. When that matter, that material was in the air, and that evidence was presented to various groups, and you can see there's the City of Chicago, Cook County, the state's involved with this, obviously the IEPA, the Pollution Control Board, the Illinois Attorney General, Senator Durbin's office, Congressman Kelly. So a lot of different government agencies and other non-government agencies looking at this, and I think it speaks to the complexity of this whole issue. But during the fall, the city, state, all those different agencies were looking at ways to address this issue. Obviously, the Attorney General's office and the city filed suit. There are some private lawsuits. To your question, what can you do? I'm certainly not promoting anyone to take action on their own or not take action, but I know there is private lawsuits out there. You need to talk to those attorneys who are pursuing that. So with that all in mind, the city, state, county, all those folks went to work to figure out how to address this. As a result of the incident and additional investigation, and extensions and public hearings and meetings and everything else, in March, the city of Chicago, and even then it was a question about who does what. Is it the city? Is it the state? We released a set of rules and regulations. So it was encompassing not just the Petcoke, and when we talk about Petcoke, we're referring to coke, coal, Petcoke, Metcoke, so a wide variety there, and other bulk materials. Those materials that may be slag, pig iron, gravel, sand, things of that nature. So this event, or this project, brought up a lot of interest. We passed rules and regulations that says all the operators up and down the river, pretty much everyone except those who handle sand, for example, have to take action to comply with certain rules. Everything from paving their property, the roadways on their property, watering the piles, putting surfactant down there, which is like a coating that helps to keep material from becoming airborne. Covering materials as it's leaving the site, installing air monitors, installing a weather station that monitors wind, velocity, speed, moisture content, all those things which have an impact on operations and eventually, potentially, if this material gets into the air. Setbacks, requiring businesses to operate so far away from property lines, including the water. So that process is underway right now. It has specific timetables in regard to your question, and all this material is online through the city website. I think we have it on our website too. It's about 30 pages, and you would think that it's a quick read, quite honestly, and it's pretty much in layman's term explaining what I just told you. Pave the roads, spray this, cover this, and it talks about all those requirements for the businesses. The non-Petcoke folks don't have to enclose. They have to take certain action to put up walls, spray, street sweepers, things of that nature. The rules and regs do say for the Petcoke, and I use that in a general term, again, addressing Petcoke, Metcoke, coal, if they choose to operate, they have to enclose. They have to enclose their material. And the thought there is, or one of the arguments by the other non-Petcoke operators, is that this material, the Petcoke, is lighter and thus more subject to becoming airborne. Gravel, some of you folks worked in the mills. Pig iron, not as light, not as dusty as some of this other material, so different rules and regs for different material. The ultimate goal is to enclose the Petcoke material within a structure. And I've used this analogy, and excuse me for my poor analogy, if you get a prisoner, and I'm not questioning whether you believe in capital punishment or anything like that, but if you get a prisoner, some people want to see that prisoner put to death. They're sick and tired of all that harm that person has done. If you can't put them to death, what do? You put them in solitary confinement, right? You lock them up 23 hours a day, no visitors, no this and that. That way he or she is as confined, can do no more harm to the public as possible. I'm talking about the same thing with Petcoke. If we're concerned about its ability to get into the neighborhood, short of getting rid of it altogether, and the opportunity to shut them down, as Evan described, is minimal from a judge perspective, the next best thing, at least in my opinion, I would hope everyone would agree, to enclose it. Put it in a building, 4 walls and a roof, as to thus minimize any potential exposure. Just like here right now, we're in a shelter, it's very little opportunity that people are outside are going to hear us, smell us, see us because we're enclosed. The same pursuit is happening with the Petcoke. Up until the 17th of this month, I want to say the 17th, excuse me if I have my dates wrong, companies have an opportunity to submit variances. There's certain ways you can address complying with the rules and regulations that we have. For example, I know one company says, we're this close to the water, we don't have the opportunity to put a setback any further because that would take away our ability to access the water. So that's a variance or an exception that the company is looking for, even though the rules and regs say something else. And they've got to argue that. And these companies are submitting their variances saying, we want to comply with the law, but we think these are equal alternatives based on various facts. Another thing that we, the City Council, did about a month later in April was pass a law and ordinance to the zoning code that said no new operators. So short of, again, shutting these businesses down and say get out, we passed an ordinance that said no new businesses can come into the neighborhood. So you've heard of the KCBX, the Beamster boards, unless you had a valid operating permit a year prior to the date that we submitted this, no new entries can come into the market. And trust me, you have people who always want to come in and try to do something. We passed a law that said no new operators. So what is the city doing in coordination with the Illinois Attorney Generals and the IEPA and all these other agencies? Those two big things, the rules and regs, which is a larger 30-page document, again, which says you can operate, however, you got to operate this, and that way. And there's certain timelines at which point certain steps have to be met. Because obviously you can't require someone to do something overnight. If I said, you got to build a garage to house your car. I can't expect the garage to be built tomorrow. You've got to go through the architect, you got to bid it out, you actually have to construct it. So just being realistic with that, we've implemented timelines to hopefully get them to comply with that. Between the rules and regs and the zoning code, which prohibits any new operators from coming in and operating a Petcoke facility, we're hopeful that that will help to address this problem. And again, it is a multi-jurisdictional agency. I know Senator Durbin's office has asked that disease control look at the potential hazards of Petcoke, because historically Petcoke has been deemed a byproduct, waste. It was considered non-hazardous. He's asked the Center for Disease Control to re-examine this to see if it is in fact a hazard. And I'm not disputing, it's a problem. It can be an irritant, you breathe it in, gets in your eyes, it gets on your property, but that's different than being a hazard from the federal level. So he's asked that the CDC look to examine it and see if there's something that they're missing. Right now, a lot of properties, households in the city are estimated in terms of the water use. You can put your sprinkler out and water the lawn 48 hours, you get the same bill as your neighbor who didn't water his or her lawn, because you're only getting billed based on your house, not on your actual usage. We, the city, have been encouraging people to participate in the Meter Save program, so you're paying only for the water you use, and to make sure you're more conscious about your environment in terms of not using water unnecessarily. You had mentioned Lake Michigan, or Dave, you mentioned Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan is not unlimited in terms of its resources. It's a large fresh body of water, but the levels have been going down over the years. That's why we're happy about this last winter in terms of more snow, ice, and replenishing it. But there are opportunities to address those issues. So I just wanted to give you an overview. The rules and regs are a big 30-page document that talk about exactly what these companies have to do. The other simpler document, but very strong, says no new operators can come into the market. And those are just summaries of that. So there's a lot more detail to it, but I wanted to bring that to light.
Okay, now wait, just a second. We have B's had her hand up for quite a while, but I want to say after B, I'd like to call Lorraine up to report on the Fight Petcoke work that SOAR has been a part of, to further the discussion, and then we'll take more questions after that. If that's okay. So go ahead. B.
Well, first my voice doesn't I'd like to thank the Attorney General's office since I made the phone call, and to let Lisa Madigan know we appreciate the opportunity. And I'm glad that you heard from Rose and Dave, because we have a double interest. Our members, and we don't stop at the state line, but our members are working with this stuff, as Rose pointed out. So you're suffering it all day, and then when you go home, you don't want to have to suffer it all night. And there's been talk about covering and so forth. I can't understand with our precious Lake Michigan, and yes, don't waste the water, but how can they allow polluting substance in a metropolitan area, and I don't care what cover you put over it, it's not going to stop it from leaching into the ground. And if we don't so there should be some kind of suit about protecting Lake Michigan. Not just, it's like putting a Band-Aid over a cancer. It may stop it from oozing out, but it's not going to stop it from poisoning the body. bothered. So.
Okay, thank you. Lorraine, would you like to comment? We're gonna continue after with questions and stuff, but I think people should hear about what we're doing.
Okay. SOAR Fund, along with Juan Diego Community Center, initiated an effort, petitioning effort to all our elected representatives, and we named that effort Fight Petcoke Chicago. Luchar contra el Petcoke Chicago. We meet once a month at the Bodak Library, the first Wednesday every month. It's only an hour. We invite families to come with their children, and they do. Last month we had 15 children. You know, we've sent over 2,100, that's 2,000 plus 10th Ward signatures to 10 or 11 elected representatives. You all know this, people, the SOAR members have been involved in this. So I'm going to make a couple of points about things that have been discussed, and I want to say that if you come to our monthly meetings, you'll know what I'm talking about, because these are the kind of things we all share with each other, you know, news items that we know. But first I want to point out some of our very, very important petitioners. We wouldn't be at the 2,000 mark without some people that I want to stand up. Rick McGraw, Ann and Cliff. Ann is going door to door. David, stand up, David. David and Jim Lane. Thank you. Real troopers. So, and if you don't have our 2-page educational flyer, most of you have it, but if you don't, please take one, and it has our meeting dates at the bottom. Come and see any of us here at this table. I just want to say that while the regulations that were passed by the city were something, they weren't very much. They were weak. We all know that in this community. And now all of you have signed the objection to the variance. Now Koch brothers comes and says they don't want 2 years to cover, they want 4 years. And as B said, covering isn't even sufficient. What about a floor? What about what's leaking underneath? And they also want to raise the height of the piles. And if they win this variance, they'll be back for more. We know that. We're not naive. We're the union movement. We know how this works. So we have a big battle ahead of us. The ordinance that was passed by the city council was ordinance number 5 or number 6. It went from the first ordinance that was tabled that opposed the Petcoke to a very weak ordinance that said no new companies, but then there were allowances for excusing certain companies for coming in anyway. So we all know we have a big battle. Someone came to our meeting last time and said, I can't believe this is still going on. And we had to say to her, you know, this is going to go on a long, long time. So we have to build a big movement, and that's what we're about. Invite your neighbors. This is what we do. We're now petitioning. We were doing churches and food pantries, as you all know, during the winter. Now we're going door to door out in the community. And the nice part is we've recruited a number of people from the Annunciata Choir. Is that cool or what? So, but those are the kind of people we need. Young mothers with children who are concerned about their kids. So, I turn it back to Scotty. Thank you. Repeat, what did you say, Dr. T?
What is Petcoke used for?
Petcoke is coming right now. Petcoke is actually coming into South Chicago. Is as I was saying before, almost all of it, as far as we know, and I'm not saying it's coming from, but generally it's coming from whiting. The reason why they're produced, and Petcoke has always been part of the petroleum refining process. But what's happening now is because the raw material that they use in whiting is coming from Canada, and what they're doing, instead of usually when people think of like petroleum refining, you're thinking of like oil that's being pumped up out of the ground. Well, that's kind of like our grandfathers' petroleum. Nowadays, though, what's happening with Whiting is that they're taking what's called tar sands oil. And it's oil that's actually, rather than sitting in like big reservoirs underneath the surface of the ground, it's actually oil that's kind of trapped inside of rock and sand formations underneath the ground. And so you hear about fracking and you hear about things like that, you have to use more aggressive processes to actually extract this material from the ground. The raw material itself, though, also has more what's called bitumen, which is a kind of an unpleasant byproduct in terms of the petroleum refining process. And so when that kind of heavier crude oil is being refined by the Whiting refinery or any other refinery that's dealing with it, they produce more petcoke as a byproduct. And so it's really just a waste product that's being produced as part of, making gasoline and other kinds of refined petroleum products.
So in other words, what you're saying, they're just gonna keep stockpiling. So it's useless, right?
Well, it's
Not gonna move. It's not used for other things.
well, actually, what happens with the petcoke, and the reason it's as far as we understand it, what's taking place is in other countries around the world, such as Mexico and India, petcoke is actually, it still has fuel value. Okay, it's not the most efficient type of fuel that you could ever use, but if you have an electrical generating station, you could actually use petcoke and burn that. It just happens to be very, very dirty, like dirtier even than using coal. So what happens is this material gets, there are brokers that apparently acquire it or make arrangements for it to come from the refinery and then sell it abroad to Mexico, India, and other places like that.
Another question is, you're saying to me, to us, this product in some form or way comes from Canada?
The raw material that comes to the refinery.
Why can't they just get barges and throw that stuff back and send it back to Canada? Let Canada. Huh?
Because
$6 billion industry, that's why.
Come up with jobs, and then nothing.
Okay. I wanna ask a question.
I don't buy it.
Because I've heard this and I want to know if anybody knows it's true or not. My understanding is that there are no petcoke facilities in Indiana because the state of Indiana has banned storage and use of petcoke. Why is it that Indiana can do that and Illinois can't? If that's true.
First part of your question, yes, that's true. Indiana does not allow storage of petcoke. And you couldn't actually use petcoke in Illinois either. In terms of using it as a fuel,
But you can store it. You can't store it in Indiana.
right? And that's what that's through legislative and regulatory efforts, perhaps that will change. But right now, it isn't able to actually store it.
One of the questions that was asked is about what you all can do, and I think you indicated, IEPA, let's go, let's get on it. But there actually is something that you can do, and I was glad to see the representative from SOAR here, who talked about her workers who did such a good job about getting petitions out. There is a dust emissions law that we have that I can leave, that we have tried to get out to the residents to distribute so that you guys can document the incidences that you see. So you can give us the date, the time, what you saw, where you were at, all of that. And then we want you to turn that stuff in to the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, okay? That helps them, okay, in terms of helping you. So help your own cause. So I have the logs here, okay? More than welcome to take them. If you need to make copies, that's fine, okay? We work with the Alderman's office in terms of distributing them, okay? I really want to work with SOAR to get that information, to use them as a tool to help us get that information out. But that's one of the ways that the average citizen can sort of work on their own behalf, okay? Because you're getting the information to the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency so that they can say, okay, when they have to go and present their case, they can say, here, this is directly from the citizens, okay, from the community, okay? And these are the incidents that were happening. And we just want you to document them. So that is one way that you can do that. And I will certainly leave these logs here for you.
And I'd just like to follow up on one point about what Skip was just saying. When our office is trying to actually prosecute these cases, for us to have the most successful effort that we can to prosecute cases, rather than being able to say, gee, there's a lot of petcoke dust that's being, emitted from these facilities, to be able to say on July 7th, 2014, at 1:30 in the afternoon, I saw petcoke coming off of this facility or another facility, and these are the other circumstances that were involved when I saw that. And to have a number of reports like that is far more valuable to us, and it's the kind of evidence that you need in order to be able to show to a judge why it is that what you want in terms of relief should be granted, because you have specific information that you can give to a judge. The other thing I'll say about the need for having people in the community to be active, to take advantage of these forms, is that Illinois EPA, for this region, okay, the northeastern Illinois region, which includes the Chicago and Cook County area, there's less than a dozen inspectors for the Bureau of Air that are responsible for keeping tabs on things like petcoke and things of that nature, okay? That's less than a dozen inspectors that cover literally hundreds and hundreds and really thousands of facilities throughout this region. They can't be every place at all times. And so the way in which you kind of fill in the gaps for Illinois EPA not to be at the right place at the right time is for citizens that are in the community to be the eyes and ears and to help the agency. Okay? So just make that plug, please. We have the form, so please take advantage of it.
And I'm going to re-emphasize that plug. These are the forms. I know our office flyer it everywhere. This was on our website. We put it out on Facebook some time ago. Skip and Evan are right. These went out bilingually from the river east to past Avenue O, from I think 103rd all the way down to 114th Street here. As I said, the state doesn't have unlimited resources, nor does the city in terms of our inspectors, but if someone is violating the law, if it's not reported, we don't have any chance of getting out there. And the city does have, through the health department, inspectors who can go out there. So if there is some kind of problem, not only fill out this form, but I'm going to ask you to call up 311 too, so that we can have inspectors. We probably, in all honesty, no disrespect to the IEPA, have a little better luck in terms of getting our crews out there, our inspectors, because we have a smaller area, they're closer. They may not be out there within the hour, but both agencies, IEPA, Attorney General, and the city, have the ability, even a day later, to go into the company and say, we had a report of an emission or this problem yesterday at 12 noon. Anything happening there? Do you have any kind of information you want to share with us? And maybe the company says, yes, our system broke down or whatever, something else happened. That goes as part of the inspection and the enforcement that we take and or the state. So it's really important to observe something. It's also important for the enforcement end to report it and document it. So please, if you see that, see something, let us know.
I'd like to say something.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to address the people who are here. I think the people up on the tables have already heard our complaints, and I think for me as a mom, I find it extremely insulting that I am being asked to do the job of the Attorney General, the EPA, and Mr. Pope, because what I don't have that kind of time. I have children that I'm caring for, and I'm also trying to get the information about Petcoke to other moms, and I'm trying to do it in Spanish. So we have a group of, a renegade group of community members who are taking it upon themselves to educate the community about the Petcoke, because it's not just enclosing it and the problem is solved. We also have barges and trains that are being going through the neighborhood uncovered, because that is something that the city and the state cannot regulate. And these trains are passing over Taylor School. They're landlocking everybody in Hegewisch. What if there is a problem at Grissom, at Clay, at one of the schools in Hegewisch? I went personally to 3 fire departments in the neighborhood and asked them, what is the contingency plan if there is a disaster in Hegewisch? How are we going to get to those families, to those children? Why is that falling on me? Why is that falling on me? Why are we not talking to our first responders? Why don't we know what kind of material is being transported? What is it, Petcoke? Is it refined petroleum? What kind of disasters? How many people have to be sick? I'm just really, I feel very insulted that we are being placated because we don't have that. We don't have variances that I can apply for so I can have clean air to breathe and water to drink. There is no exception that I can apply for, but it is given to companies like the Koch brothers and KCBX, okay? And then the city goes on to say that because lately there hasn't been any complaints to the city, that they don't have enough evidence to deny these variances. This is the rainy season. The Petcoke is settled. They're going to base regulations for the next 4 years on the rainy season. That's also very insulting. I don't have to be a scientist to know that during this time it rains often, and that's why you might not be seeing the complaints that you were seeing throughout the rest of the year. But there is something that needs to be done, and that is banning the Petcoke like it was done in Detroit, removing it from our backyards, and that's it. There is no other thing. We don't need to talk about anything else. This is dangerous for everyone. The Petcoke, the BP contracts out to a different company to transport the Petcoke through by trucks, and they're paying the workers by the load. This is putting the workers in danger, and it's putting the community that these trucks are plowing through in danger, because those workers are just trying to feed their families like all the rest of us. There was an accident on 106 in Indianapolis Boulevard where a truck took the turn too fast. Everybody on this panel should be outraged and should write to the city and hope. You should let the city know that these variances, that you are outraged by them, that you don't want these variances to be accepted. And KCBX has sent letters out to everybody in the community talking about how they have been doing the best they can and making all these improvements, and that they haven't had any kind of violations. And then 3 days later, the EPA serves them with a notice of violation. There is a miscommunication campaign going on in our neighborhood, and Polk needs to react and respond to it and send a letter out to everybody that got that KCBX letter and let them know that that company is actually lying, that we are doing the best we can, send out some kind of response And you absolutely have got it and complete
All right,
out
can
of
I speak
control.
now? You can yell, that's fine. I'm giving you the facts, and those are the facts.
beg your pardon,
Excuse
wasn't
me.
yelling.
Excuse me.
Wasn't yelling.
Okay, semantics.
Okay.
We have done various items bilingually. You've been the recipient of that. The variances that you're submitting, there's a timeline. That is the law. Whether I agree with it or not, it has to go through that process. There's due process. That timeline for accepting the variances is, the variances, there's nothing decided on at this point. They have an option to appeal the law, just like any of us, if we get cited for a violation, can go to court and appeal it. The city has made no decision about accepting variances or not. They're still coming in. So there's been no decision made. Everything's got to be gathered to review that. You did make a point about material coming in and out. That is a good point.
What about the rain?
Wait a minute,
Again.
excuse me.
I mean, a lot of really good points.
Actually, both of you, I will talk, I will talk afterwards. It's not, I'm not trying to stop it.
Material and spreading all over, and those things are increasing. So it doesn't do anything about that. Also, you can't expect to build a garage the next day, but 2 years, and now they want 4 years, you know what I mean? I know, but I mean, you know what I mean? 2 years is plenty, you know? But also, just wanted to say too, that the judges don't look very good about putting a company out of business. But it doesn't necessarily put a company out of business like CBS, which is pretty well backed, to require that they move out of the city. Okay? So I don't know how the judges might look at that. You know, require them to move. Doesn't necessarily put them out of business, but, you know. And then the other thing is, I don't know if your office knows anything we can do to try to strengthen our EPA, Illinois EPA, so that they do not allow storage of Petcoke.